were you able to share this to friends and have support there from them?
Yes, but unfortunately, I did an awful job of asking for help, Adam. My
Well,
friend,
so this is really good though. Like, how do men do that? How can we say, I need help?
Dear young married couple, you know you have a calling on your life and you've responded to that call of God. You're leading, you're serving, and you're doing what you feel called to do. But you're not okay.
You could be feeling stressed. You could be feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you're ridden with anxiety or depression. You're wondering, what do I do about this?
And this is the exact position that Pastor Jathan Maricelli found himself in. He's the senior pastor of a church in Louisiana, and he was asking himself in this position, do I take a sabbatical? Do I keep leading and trying to go even though I'm in this really dark place? Do I just quit? What do I do? And in today's episode, he tells us how he answered that question and what he decided to do.
So before we go to the interview, we want to let you know if you're in this position, this opportunity that's coming up very soon could be something that you would be interested in.
We are holding an adventure and intimacy retreat right here in Sacramento, California,
Yes.
our hometown, and we would love to have you at this retreat. The deadline to register is May 15th, so that's only a few days away, and we'll put the link in the show notes. We're going to have a really good time, but
Yeah.
we're also going to dig deeply for leaders who want to really connect with each other, a husband and wife leadership team to connect with each other in their intimacy.
Yes, we're all about at DYMC helping you get tools and connecting people and really giving you the resources so you can become your best self. So sign up. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there.
Welcome, Pastor Jathan Maricelli, to the podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
Welcome.
it's great to be here, Adam and Carissa.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing not only your story, but some really powerful wisdom that came from your story that you have to share with the leaders who are listening. So, folks, this is for you. If you are a leader, you're in ministry, you're working hard in the kingdom, tune in.
Yeah, just people living busy lives need to listen to this.
Seriously. Yeah. So let's rewind back to the beginning of your story, wherever you want to start that makes sense for you, and tell us where this all began, this concept of knowing what's on your plate and how much needs to be on your plate.
Yeah, you ever been in one of those altar services where you get the call of God and God the preacher preaches and dangles you all over hell. You got to reach the lost and, we got to reach the world. And that is a wonderful moment. And, I'm being a little facetious, but it truly is a great moment to respond to God calling you to do great things.
Yeah.
What they don't tell you is that there also it is a journey that if you're not careful can end in great disaster. Despite the fact that you were not out of the will of God, you were following the call of God. And my wife and I went to plant the church, and it was fantastic.
Okay.
Until it wasn't. And we had lots of complexity that piled up in our lives. We started having kids, great, wee! And then we had 3 and one got epilepsy. Then we had a 4th, and the church started going downhill a little bit and struggling. Insurance went up. I got a second job and, so on and so forth. And all of that call of God turned into, all of a sudden I started having these dark moods I couldn't get out of. I didn't know it, but I was battling depression. And so 7.5 years into the church plant, we resigned because I was an absolute wreck and battling depression. And
what did that look like? You say battling depression. What did absolute wreck look like?
Well, my wife was worried I was going to hurt myself. I never contemplated suicide, but I couldn't. I would, on the way to church, I would just have this dark cloud of depression. I would have to go to church but I'd go home from work and shut the door, turn the lights off in the bedroom. And if you know me, that's not like me. And I just had no motivation to do anything. I couldn't
Wow.
just trying to get away from that horrible hurt inside. You can't get to it. Like you can't do anything to get to it. And so what do? You kind of get in the fetal position or protect yourself. Oh, I got to go preach in an hour. So
Wow.
follow me in the car. And I'd get into the church and see all the people, and it would lift because I would begin ministering to people, preach, also play the guitar, sing, and everything else because I was a church planter.
Right.
And when it was over and I would lock up, and when I would start walking toward the car, here comes that black cloud of depression, and it would engulf me again. And I did that probably for a year.
Wow.
And I came home one day and told my wife, better men than me have done worse things, have fallen, and I cannot do this anymore. I've got to go home and get well.
Wow.
And she agreed. So that was 7.5 years into church planting, and that was about 5 years ago. So grateful.
Wow.
However, that God didn't miss it on his calling way back when in that altar where God called me to something great. And he didn't miss it for you today either, if you're listening. However, we would all do well to look inside and press pause and let God transform us, because oftentimes when God calls us to do something great, we don't have enough in us to accomplish it yet. And sometimes the pain and the suffering is what he uses to help us to level up to the complexity that he's calling us to.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how actually C.S. Lewis says that pain is God's megaphone to reach a dying world.
Wow.
In a way, I think that's sometimes a way of getting our attention to something that's really important. Because life without pain is actually really dangerous.
Yes.
How did so depression was one of those indicators for you. Now I'm sure that your antenna is up with other ministry and the people that you rub shoulders with. How else does this idea of burnout show up in people's lives?
Well, the World Health Organization classifies burnout as feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. Okay, so let's take that in a ministry context. And I experienced all of these.
Okay.
Feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. I'll be honest with you, we had an amazing revival this past weekend. I have had a temporary feeling of energy depletion and exhaustion Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. All right. That is part of pastoring. I've got 4 kids, one of them special needs. That's part of life.
Yeah.
Prolonged, however, you just can't get back renewed. When you're starting to get burned out, the things that used to renew you, for example, with me, I live in a neighborhood. It's all beautiful. I've got a lake. I go play golf, go play basketball. Something that can renew me. If all of a sudden those things aren't even touching it. I remember one time I went to like a conference in Louisiana district, and I knew I was going to see my friends, and usually that would just fill me right up because I get to be around my friends, and it just in a church setting didn't even touch it. I went home just as exhausted as I was before. So I would say the first thing is that if you just can't get renewed, pay attention. Something is going on there. That's the
good.
first.
Good.
Yeah. Prolonged.
Yeah. And what are the other signs?
Increased mental distance from one's job.
Yeah, what does that
cynicism
mean?
related to one's job. Okay, now we're starting to get a different level, because if you put this in a ministry context, listen, I also taught school for 8 years. By the way, bivocationally doing that, teaching school and pastoring was not a good idea. In hindsight, is taken from the same source emotionally. But I got cynical toward the educational system because of, the way that it's run. That's one thing. But when you get mental distance from the ministry, now you got a problem, because you're supposed to be connecting with people. You're supposed to be bringing these people's needs before the Lord. Yes, the ones that drive you nuts. Yes, the people that keep on. But you're supposed to be, bringing them compassionately before the Lord.
Mm.
Well, when you get mental distance from that, you begin to just kind of cut people off, and the prayer ethic in having compassion for people is not there.
That's
What
good.
about your preaching? When you preach, you're supposed to really pray and fast and get a word from God and study it out
Right.
and communicate in a fresh way.
Mm.
Well, when you're burned out, you begin to preach from your talent, your ability, and your know-how. That is a problem because you can do it if you've been doing it long enough. But eventually, when you do this, and I don't mind telling you, I lost my way with God. I wouldn't say I backslid and I didn't fall into some kind of moral abyss, which I'm so grateful for by the grace of God. But let me tell you something. I lost my way with God because I was operating on what I knew to do because I'm raised in a pastor's home. I preached.
Sure.
I knew people, but burnout will steal your energy. And if you develop the cynicism, you will begin to take shortcuts that will ruin you spiritually.
Yeah.
And the third one is the reduced professional efficacy. Then you just start doing a bad job. You're not doing justice to your church.
Yeah.
At some point when I resigned, I came home to tell my wife, there's a story where the church, we were looking to buy a new building and we put an offer in on it. And I remember the church was so disappointed when they rejected our offer. And I was so excited. I was so happy that they didn't accept the offer because I've got to try to find a way to pay for it. I've got to, we got to work. I knew how much work it would be to fill the building up.
Sure.
And I realized right then, I am not leading at all. I'm not. My professional efficacy is gone. And, you can take a break and get renewed and do that. But I had been operating on total burnout for about a year, and I was past the point of no return to where to save my ministry, my relationship with God and my family that I had to resign. And I don't recommend everybody resign, but for me, it was the right answer.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. Some of those clues, like being out of touch with the people. It's like when you're empathy, you have no more empathy to give. It's just gone. And you're just like, you dummy, stop doing that.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So what was the trigger for you to just say, I need to step back and resign? Well, I mean, that must have been a pretty momentous decision and
And requires
realization.
humility too.
Yeah, sure did.
I definitely don't want to pin roses on the humility of me. At this point, I was raised in a pastor's home, and I had seen men fall. And my grandfather was one of them. But it's my grandfather, his might have been a little more predictable because he had some behaviors that, you could look and say, well, hey, you might have seen that coming a little bit. And you certainly don't want to try to predict someone falling, but man, it's the ones that you like. I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah.
That give you that really sober you. And I'd had that in my background. And I was at school on my planning period reading a book called Dangerous Calling.
Okay.
And I just read through there and I got about halfway through it and I quit. And I said, I am playing with fire, and I'm not going to be one of those people, if I can help it, that it took a great fall for them to holler and say, I need help. Because when do you know that you've gone too far?
Right.
And I was like, I don't know if I'm too far now. I know that I haven't fallen morally, but man, when do you go too far to where you're just going to fall morally and it's going to take you crashing and burning? Not that God can't restore, but I've seen the carnage of that. And I came home to my wife and said, all right, we can still dig our way out of this, but I fear that it is going to take me resigning. And at that point, she had lost 6 inches of her hair. It had fallen out.
Wow.
And she was struggling so badly. And once again, my son was really bad epileptic at that time. And so it was very painful to leave the church we founded, but that was the moment that kind of changed everything for us. And it was hard. It was. Resigning is no silver bullet, but when I look back, man, I'm so grateful that God led us to do that.
That's amazing. And I want to hear the rest of the story, but can we pause here? And for those who are listening and they're like, I think I'm finding myself in a similar position. I feel maxed. I don't know how far is too far. What would be maybe any indication or symptoms that you could describe as being in the category of you actually need to resign versus maybe they need a sabbatical?
That is a great question.
What's
I went
sabbatical
to
mean?
Yeah.
yeah. I would say for me, I could not handle the thought of taking a couple weeks off and coming back and leading a church. And I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew what it required. And I knew, short of an extended absence, maybe a year sabbatical could have done it, but I knew what it took to pastor. And I knew I cannot run back into the fray without a lot of transformation here. And that wasn't always the case. There were times if I had taken care of myself better, hey, maybe a month or so, or maybe a couple of weeks, or however long it takes people, and I could have seen myself. But at this point in time, Adam and Carissa, I had lost total confidence in my calling. And that's a level where you might want to consider living to fight another day, as my good friend Donovan Hill told me. And that's what it came to for me. If you're in the live to fight another day, you might need to do so. On the other hand, if you are not too deep into this, I would recommend, taking some kind of break and talk with your church about it, because those are definitely two different routes, and you don't have to go as far as I did.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was that good friend a part of your accountability, or were you able to share this to friends and have support there from them?
Yes, but unfortunately, I did an awful job of asking for help, Adam. My friend.
So this is really good though. Like, how do men do that? How can we say, I need help?
Well, you can burn out and crash and burn to realize that if you don't ask for help, you're going to lose everything, and then you can get really good at it. My friend had done this before, and he went several states away, pastored a church. He struggled with burnout, and he resigned. And I had a relationship with him, and I knew he had gone down this avenue. So I called him. Short of that, I was surrounded by people, Adam and Carissa, that would have helped me. Oh man, I am so blessed with friends. They're so supportive and ministers. And I just kept going down. And I would not say, hey, I'm struggling here. Hey, listen, I'm going down. And I found that the presence and the proximity of help does not guarantee you help.
Because you had available help, but you didn't take advantage of it. At the time, did you think that was like a matter of faith? Like, I'm just going to trust God. It's going to get better. He takes the dark cloud off when I get to church. Like, what was that about at the time?
I was going to say, what was the lie that you're telling yourself? Okay.
Yeah.
It was pride. It was arrogance. It was, it's fallenness in me that I am going to do this, and I am going to get credit for having done this. And I left my dad's church. My dad's a pastor, and I prided myself too much in the fact that I didn't stay there when the safety of my father's covering, but I went out and started a church. And I went to Chicago first, and then I went to North Louisiana, and nobody handed me anything. And I did it. And then when things started going badly, I was determined to do it. And once again, it's part of my own brokenness and the way that I'm wired that conspired against me. And then I just got mad at everybody for not helping me. despite the fact that I would not ask them for help. So I started to get angry with people for not helping me, people for not interpreting my emotions. And let me just pause and say, if you're going to ask for help, you cannot depend on people to interpret where you are.
That's so
You
good.
have to articulate. And as much as it hurts you to say, I need help, will you help me, please?
Yeah.
For people like me, I would rather be dragged by horses and, than to say, I'm incomplete. I'm not self-sufficient. Will you help me, please? And just pause and say, you've got to do that. Now, if you're codependent and that's not asking for help, you're codependent and you need to work on that. Or, if you're doing blame gaming and you're blaming everybody else, and dropping all kinds of passive aggressive comments, that's not asking for help. Asking for help, however, is you activating your dignity of choice, which God gave you to reach out and ask for help. Now, you have to understand people might not help you, but you got to take that risk and ask for it. And so I made people's decisions for them. Oh, they're not going to help me. Oh, that one's not going to help me. Blah, 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 blah. I made people's decisions for them. And listen, I almost paid too big a price for that. And I would just say to anybody out there, listen, get past that. Make yourself vulnerable, because chances are you have people that would move heaven and earth for you. Adam and Chris, I literally had friends who would have lined up a year's worth of preaching to come preach at my church to give me a break. I mean, they would have helped me financially. They would have sent us to counseling. They would have done anything. And instead I just went down and listen, part of my nature is what makes me driven to go pastor a church, plant a church somewhere where I don't know anybody. And it helps me to have that grit to, pastor a church and 4 kids and a special needs son. But we've also got to realize that some of those parts that make you a good leader could also cause you to crash and burn and become a ministry statistic. So you gotta know, you gotta know yourself.
Yes.
And at this point I did not. And
Wow.
So you're welcome.
What does healthy help look like? Because I've seen in some other aspects, I've seen people ask for help, right? And then it's just kind of a conversation. They were vulnerable, but nothing actually transpired. What does that look like to actually start to get help? It's not just talking about it, but help us with that.
Wow, that is a tremendous question. What does healthy help look like? I would say after 3 years of therapy, I can say that it really begins with you realizing, first of all, that you are not unredeemed and backslidden because you're insufficient, incomplete in yourself. And you got to know that as a help receiver. You have got to own it and say, I'm always going to be vulnerable in this life. In this jar of clay, I'm always going to need help.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't begin there, you're not going to really be able to balance carrying your own knapsack as it says in one of the epistles. I'm slipping my mind, Galatians, I believe it is, where, hey, listen, you carry your own knapsack here. You can't be codependent, because you're going to wear people out and no one's going to want to help you because they're carrying your knapsack and they got their own to carry. Versus, hey, legitimately receiving help. And I know for me, when I was able to realize my own brokenness and I saw the places that I legit needed help, I was able to ask for it and ask for it from the right people. And just as an example here recently, I went through a season after about 3 years senior pastoring here where I could tell I was experiencing some burnout symptoms, and man, I did not want to go to the church board and elders and ask them for help. I didn't want to do it. And the only thing that helped me is because of my great mistake before. And I said, guys, I need about a month away from the pulpit. I do. And, they were yes, Pastor. Obviously, they know I'm not lazy. They know I'm not asking them to carry me on a knapsack. I've got credibility there. So I think that balance of having credibility for the fact that you're not being codependent.
Right.
But you legit need help, and the asker to know how to articulate it. And listen, it was exactly what I needed, and it helped me so much. So it is not, I don't want to minimize it. It is a complex thing to ask and receive that kind of help. But guys, listen, it's worth leaning into and really working this out, because we all need each other. Forever. You'll go to heaven having needed one another in the body of Christ.
You know, what's amazing is we jeopardize the longevity of the mission for the immediacy of like the needs around us. And we lie to ourselves and say, we can't not help these people. We can't not do this and this and this and this and this, and realize that you can't pour out of an empty pitcher. We have to fill that pitcher up in order to serve. So I love that. Like,
where were you 10
down
years
the
ago,
road?
man?
Well, I'm learning this too. I think as we serve and help people and are in this business, and seeing men like you who have learned this and try to learn that from people. But I think it's that humility, knowing that we're not Jesus. And even Jesus had to sleep, and Jesus had to do things that that were human.
Yes, exactly.
I love that, what you're saying.
So you took this 3-year break. At the time, you didn't know how long it was going to be, but you mentioned you knew it had to be long term. You got some counseling. You went home. Was home your parents' church?
Yes.
Okay. So you went home. That obviously required humility.
I did.
And did you seek accountability, like fellow ministers, friends? Who were some other people that you connected with?
I am in a mentoring group with about 10 pastors.
So cool.
And I find in a group like that, there's usually a couple that you really connect with in a special way. And I would not be here without them, because we get together a couple times a year. And Adam and Carissa, sometimes you've got to see people who have overcome and who say you can do it, and you got to see it. And I remember I was stuck in a classroom teaching, and I was not in vocational ministry. I was still preaching about once a month. I was still in a leadership position at the church where I was volunteering here at my parents' church, but I was so bombarded by feelings of worthlessness, that you blew your only chance. You had great training, you had a great father, you have no excuse but your own. And you took that great opportunity, and because of your own choices, you've rammed it in the ground, and that group would not let me think of myself that way. And I would get pulled back, and I would get pulled back under, and I was still, my son's epilepsy, his seizures were a trigger for my depression, and I was still working to try to get over that. And I would take, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that group helped me to see. I would look at them and their failures, and I would look at and they were still going though. And I would look, and I knew their lives weren't perfect, and they had children, who were wayward, and they had financial problems, and they had their own mistakes, and yet they were continuing to go on, and they refused to let me believe that we were not going to rise from the ashes and be restored fully. And without them believing in me, because I had no belief in myself. And sometimes, guys, you got to have people that believe in you for yourself. And it's just the grace of God, really. And that group, I have a chapter on it in my book that I'm eternally grateful for them.
That's
That's
awesome.
beautiful. And it's what stands out to me in what you said there is that, like, the group was vulnerable enough for you to see their mistakes and know that they got over that. And that gave you, in turn, faith that, hey, we're going to get through this.
Yes.
Wow.
100%. Yeah.
You ended up transitioning back into pastoral ministry at some point. Can you share how that took place and how you knew that you were ready?
That's a great question. Because even when I got well, about 2 years after resigning and coming home, I felt well. And the Lord let me feel good for about a year before breaking the news to me that I was called to be a pastor. Because
he's like, remember?
Yeah. After about a year or so, I really started peeling back the layers of, I thought if I go home and I sit there and I'm around my support system and I'm not preaching for a while and I'm not leading, I'll just perk right back up. And it might take a minute, but that's all it'll take, just out of the pulpit, out of leadership for a while. Man, I had so many layers that God was wanting to pull back that I was not aware of. So about a year in, I was not better. I was not. And I came home to my wife and said, I need help. I think I'm going to go to therapy. And she did not argue with me. she said, okay. And so, man, after about a year of pulling back the layers and taking personal responsibility for myself, the beautiful thing about that, though, is when you take personal responsibility, you're able to self-differentiate. You're able to develop your own concept of who you are in Christ without other people telling you who you are. And thankfully, my therapist was such a great Christian man who had such a such a belief in the grace of God, that for the first time, I was able to confess my brokenness and also feel the love of God simultaneously. 38 years old, I've been raised in an apostolic home, and that was the first time I really understood I'm broken and God loves me fully. Wow. Not some, pared down love that he gives us people who are depressed and who have made mistakes and who can't see their way and who have lost their way with him. No, he loves me completely. And that power of confession was a life-changing moment. And through that, I began to get spiritually well. And so, but I was not pastoring again. I knew I was not pastoring. I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle the stress. It broke me. And I just didn't have the ability, and I wasn't gonna let people down again. I felt like I let people down, and they looked to me, and I couldn't take that risk. And
that what will people think issue was probably pervasive from the beginning of your pastoralship through the transition.
And identity was probably took a hit.
Oh, for those of you who might be considering resigning, that need to, be prepared. Your identity will take a hit, as you said. And it could be the best thing that could happen to you, but be prepared, however, to do some serious inner work. And just on that, when I got back into pastoral ministry, it was an absolute disaster. It was the worst. It was a church split. It was terrible. It was heartbreaking. And if I had not been rebuilt with my identity secure in Christ, completely destroyed me. Completely. So we pastors have identity problems because we often get them from people who need us. And that is a drug, man. I mean, and I don't need to be needed. Even with that, though, people look up to you, and it's a drug. And the problem with that is, you are not who people say you are or need you, and you are who Christ says you are, and his is the only secure identity. And let me tell you, though, that will stand up to anything. That'll stand up to sick children. That'll stand up to you broke and you don't know where your paycheck's coming from. That'll stand up to a church split where you're rejected by people who you respect the most. It will stand up to your own faults and failures. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you know what? I was the choir at 38, and I thought I knew this, and I didn't. So I would just encourage you to listen. God may be at work with something far greater, and that identity is an issue. But man, what a beautiful thing on the other side of it, because it's so secure. It really is. Sorry for rambling there, but
No, that's powerful.
definitely.
We need to hear more
It
of that
needs to be said,
message.
yeah.
Mhm.
What, now that you have been pastor, how long have you been pastoring now?
Do you want me to
This side of
digress? Okay, so sorry, I rambled, but I've been pastoring now for, oh my goodness, 4 years, and one of those was a vocational year of assistant pastoring.
Okay.
But I remember God really started knocking on my door about pastoring, and I knew, I just began to know through repeated conversations with the Lord when I was kind of avoiding it, that you have been called to carry the burden of pastoring, and as a part of you that will never like it. You will never like going to church, going to bed with the church on your shoulders. You'll never like being on call 24/7 for your entire career as a pastor. Now, I do have boundaries, but the reality is, if someone has a tragedy, it doesn't matter how tired I am. It doesn't matter how inconvenient that is. Part of you, Jathan, that doesn't like being a public figure, too bad.
Yeah.
You've been called to
Yeah.
do that. This whole idea that you don't want to be a pastor again because you might disappoint people again, because you don't trust you're a little bit skittish of yourself and holding up. Guess what? Every man and woman of God who has done anything good in the kingdom had those insecurities, and guess it's not a bad thing.
Mhm.
Apostle Paul, anybody? Thorn in the flesh. So
Yes.
once God worked me through all that, I knew I had to talk to my wife about it.
Mhm. How did she
And-
What did
receive
she
that?
say?
Once again, a chapter in the book. But
Uh-huh.
she was very reticent because she saw what it did to me, and she wondered about my ability to stand up to it, and she did not want to see me go into depression again. She did not, as a woman looking for that security of family, we had 4 kids. She
Mhm.
did not want to see our family be taken down, that path again. And so we had a nice long conversation that was spontaneous, but it was at the World War II Museum restaurant in New Orleans on it was one of our birthdays. We were kind of laid back, and it just happened at a restaurant, and we
Okay.
stayed there for about 2 or 3 hours talking.
Wow.
And it was a special, unplanned moment in marriage where she had to look in my eyes and know that I was not the same Jathan that was going back into this. And she saw that it was the truth,
Mhm.
that I was well, and that this was our calling. And look, we needed every bit of that conversation that
Mhm.
first year, because it was the worst year and a half in ministry I have ever been a part of, bar none. But man, we never wavered. And now these last 2 years have been the absolute most joyful times in ministry we have ever had. And so
Wow.
anybody out there who feels like it's over, look, lean into that feeling, do what you have to do with it. But I'm just telling you, it's not over. You will have your greatest days ahead if you allow the Lord to take this darkness and transform you, because we learn lessons in the darkness that the light will never, ever teach us.
You talk about that. You talk about it being the wilderness moments, and how the wilderness
Forms character.
deepens our character. How can you speak a little bit on that? Some people think that they can really just go to the next level without going through the wilderness.
Yeah.
Can they?
And how do you experience joy where you are right now? Like after having been through the wilderness? That's beautiful.
It is one of the great ironies in spirituality in our walk with God. It is just an irony that you will have to get used to, because some of the greatest sources of joy come from the deepest hurts that God has wallowed out inside of you. And It was Jerry Sitzer who wrote in A Grace Disguised, where he lost his mother, his daughter, and his mom in one car accident.
Mm.
And he talks about the enlargement of the soul. And we would like for our soul to be enlarged by amazing services like we just had with Joel Urshan that were so lit, as the kids say, and light and deep. And I mean, they were great. They were tremendously spiritual.
Yeah.
That's a part of how God ministers to you. But man, and I'm going to speak to those who are in it right now, because those who are not, I understand your journey is your journey, and I don't want to, create a black cloud over your life. But those who are in it right now, often it's not something you are doing wrong. But at an altar long ago, you said, if you can use anything, Lord, you can use me, with tears rolling down your face. And that was real.
Yeah.
Guess what? God's answering your prayer.
Mm.
And he sees that this broken world doesn't need a good sermon that's just been studied, and you're a good writer or communicator, and you can deliver a good, self-help speech and throw some Bible verses on it. But he needs virtue to flow out of you, because that is what heals the brokenness of this world. And to do that, it's got to come from a well and a place that God in his sovereignty is in charge of hollowing out in you. He's in charge of that stuff. So he knows how to lead you. And Jerry Sitzer's theory, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is that troubles can narrow us, and they can narrow our soul and make us cynical. And how many pastors, ministers do you know who are just flat out angry, and they're not any help because they got hurt and bitter, or church people like stuff you went through, and they went through hurt, and they're just bitter, and they backslide and go make YouTube videos about church abuse,
Right.
and other narrowed people go and follow them. I don't want to minimize that hurt, but if I could say to those people, it's just narrowing you. But if instead you'll fall on the altar by his grace, and just God wants to enlarge your soul. And what an enlargement does is it says, man, I'm hurting so badly, but Lord, I'm going to let you stretch me, and I'm going to feel this grief. I'm not going to run from this grief, but I'm going to feel every ounce of it. I'm going to feel this pain and this anger, and I'm going to do like David, and I'm going to bring it all and throw it at your feet, God, and yell at you and complain about how this is unfair. But I'm not going to do it outside of your presence. I'm going to have it out with you, God. That's allowing God to enlarge you. Yeah. Guess what happens with that grief and that sorrow? At some point in time, weeping may endure for a night. But when joy comes in the morning, now you got more of it. When the anointing comes, now you got more of it. When empathy is needed for someone who just lost their child, you got way more empathy. And so such often is the journey for those who want to be used by God, is the darkness is where you get that enlargement of the soul. But that also is what not only changes you, but truly transforms those to whom you minister.
So good.
Well said.
Wow. Well, I've got a lot out of this today, and it's
Me
so
too.
good. You're preaching. Where
Exactly.
can people find a book? Because you have put this all down, studied this out, and given a gift to people going through stuff right now. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
I wrote the book about a year and a half ago, I think. I was sitting at General Conference of the United Pentecostal Church, and during a business session, and my brain was wandering, my mind was wandering, and I felt that I had been pastoring full time for 3 years at that moment. So I felt like I had a sample size of someone who had burned out completely, thought it was over, got back into it, had enough evidence to say, no, you can do this again, because I felt like I was doing well. So I felt the Lord tell me, all right, Jathan, I'm not asking you to repay me for all that I've done for you. I'm not asking for, you don't have receipts on all the grace and mercy, but I am asking you to write this book and give hope to those who are suffering in silence. And so that was the genesis of writing the book. I wrote it memoir style. So it would be a story that people, self-help, I get a little, I read a lot and I read a lot of self-help, but I didn't want it to be self-helpy. I wanted it to be a story where there were universal experiences for people to apply their own experience. And I have found that has been the feedback, as people identify with these experiences because they're human experiences. They're not Jathan experiences. And that's probably been one of the greatest joys I've gotten from the book, is that people who are in silence a lot of times, suffering, it's been a connection to them where they felt like that they could raise their hand and go, man, you know what, I can make it, and I can get help, because sometimes we just need that push in the right direction. And you can go to jathanmaricelli.com and click the shop link and buy your copy today for only $16.99.
That'll be the best $16.99 that you've ever spent.
Yes.
If you're going through this, hear this, DYMC fam, go and get that book.
Yeah.
It's such great wisdom. I could just hear it right now, and I'm sure there's a lot more even in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Go and buy it.
We will link that in the show notes for anyone who's listening and they're like, how do I spell Maricelli? Just go to the show notes, click the link, and you can go get his book on his website. We're going to close out this episode the way that we close out all of our episodes, and that's by asking you this question. Rewind back to the first couple years of your marriage. How long have you been married now?
20 years.
20
As of like 2 months ago, we went skiing for our 20th.
Oh, I love
Sounds
that.
For the first time, and we've lived to tell the story, although the left Achilles and the right knee are still barking at me. Anyway, I had a bad fall.
So rewind back 20 years ago and ask yourself, what advice do I wish I would have received? And fill in the blank. Dear young married couple.
Dear young married couple, God is sovereign. The same sovereign God that put you together in that serendipitous yet spiritual way is going to guide you through whatever you're going through now and in the future. And you can trust that if he puts you together, all the hurt that you might be going through, or the questions, the confusion, and at your age, when you're young, you might be wondering about children, maybe struggling having children, or maybe you're trying to get a leg up in this awful economy, trying to buy a home and you can't get first-time home buyer, whatever it is that you're struggling with. The sovereign God who put you together, he is good at being God. It's like David said when he's standing there in the cave and Saul's out there ready to kill him, yet David's anointed. And he just threw his hands up and said, to the God who performs all things for me. And what that meant was, God dots every I and crosses every T in my life. He has the final say. Whatever you go through, guys, that sovereign God, he will work all things together for the good, even the burnout seasons of your life.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Hear it.
Thank you
So good.
so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your wisdom.